I never expected that the shriek of a smoke alarm would change my life. But that's exactly what happened. It wasn't the fire, because there was no fire. It was the man who showed up at my door because of the noise. A man I'd only ever watched from a distance. A man who seemed to belong to a completely different world than my own. But sometimes the simplest, most mundane mistakes are the ones that knock everything off its axis, sending you spinning into a future you never could have imagined for yourself. My life, up to that point, was a study in quiet routine. My name is Lucas. I was a graphic designer who worked from a small desk in the corner of my living room, a reality that meant my world had shrunk to the size of my one-bedroom apartment. My days were measured in cups of coffee, the hum of my computer, and the soft clicking of my mouse. It was a peaceful existence, stable and predictable, but it was also solitary. There were days when the only voice I heard was from a podcast, the only human interaction a brief nod to the delivery guy. I wasn't unhappy, not exactly. I was just paused, living in a state of quiet, unfulfilled longing that I'd grown so accustomed to. I barely even noticed it anymore. My apartment was on the third floor of a pleasantly unremarkable brick building. It was my sanctuary, filled with books and plants and the specific, organized clutter of a creative person. The windows faced a courtyard, which meant it was usually quiet, insulated from the city's noise. The most exciting part of my day was often watching the shifting patterns of light on the hardwood floors. And then there was Julian. He lived in the apartment directly across the hall, 3B. He'd moved in about 6 months before, and in my quiet, observant way, I had cataloged every brief sighting of him. Julian was, for lack of a better word, solid. He had the kind of sturdy, capable build that spoke of a life lived physically. Broad shoulders, strong hands, a calm and steady way of moving. He had dark hair, cropped short, and a face that was handsome in a rugged, unassuming way. I guessed he was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, a good decade older than me. I knew from a snippet of conversation I'd overheard with our landlord that he was a retired firefighter. The knowledge settled around him like a mantle, explaining the air of quiet authority he carried. He was the kind of man you'd want around in a crisis. He was also the kind of man I assumed was so far out of my league that we were playing different sports entirely. My perception of him was built on these fragments. Him carrying a heavy toolbox with ease, jogging past my window in the early morning fog, giving a polite but distant nod in the hallway. He was confident, self-assured, and, in my mind, undoubtedly, completely straight. He was a fixed point in my daily orbit, a planet I could admire from afar but never, ever hope to visit. The inciting incident, when it came, was embarrassingly mundane. It was a Tuesday morning, which meant I was already on my second cup of coffee and deeply engrossed in a branding project that was proving to be particularly frustrating. I'd put 2 slices of sourdough in the toaster and, in a moment of intense focus on finding the perfect shade of blue, I forgot all about them. The smell hit me first, acrid and bitter. Then came the sound. A piercing, high-pitched shriek that sliced through the quiet of my apartment and rattled my teeth. The smoke alarm. It was a new model the landlord had installed, advertised as extra sensitive for your safety, which I now realized was code for, will scream at the slightest provocation. A thin plume of black smoke was curling from the toaster. I yelped, pulling the plug and waving a dish towel frantically at the smoking bread and the detector on the ceiling. The alarm, however, was relentless. It was a full-scale, 4-alarm auditory assault. I was dragging a dining chair over to stand on, my heart hammering against my ribs more from the noise than the non-existent danger, when a loud, firm knock sounded on my door. My stomach dropped. Of course, someone had heard. I opened the door a few inches, my face flushed with a mixture of smoke and embarrassment. And there he was, Julian. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, but he stood there with an air of professional calm, his focus absolute. His eyes, a deep, warm brown, weren't looking at the smoke detector, which was still screaming. They were looking directly at me. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, his voice even and steady over the din. "Oh, God, yes, I'm so sorry," I stammered, trying to yell over the alarm. "It's just toast. I burned the toast. I'm so sorry about the noise." He didn't seem to care about the noise. He took a step closer, his gaze scanning my face with an intensity that made me feel completely transparent. "Are you okay?" Did you breathe any of that in? It was such a strange question. It was just toast. No, I don't think so. I was in the other room. He held up a hand. Just humor me, he said, his expression serious. Take a deep breath for me. Now breathe out. I was so taken aback that I just did it, inhaling deeply and then exhaling slowly. He watched my breath mist in the cool hallway air, his focus unwavering. It was the strangest, most intimate thing. He wasn't just my neighbor. For a split second, he was a firefighter, and I was someone he needed to assess. He was checking my breath, my lungs, before he even looked at the source of the alarm. After a moment, he nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Okay, you're clear. Only then did he seem to notice the shrieking again. Right? The alarm. He stepped past me into the apartment, his presence immediately making the small space feel even smaller. He didn't need the chair I dragged over. He just reached up, twisted the device with one practiced motion, and popped the battery out. Silence. Glorious, deafening silence. It rushed into the void, leaving only the faint smell of burnt bread and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I stood there, dish towel still in hand, staring at the man who had just assessed my respiratory health over a piece of toast. He turned back to me, holding the small 9-volt battery in his palm. These new ones are a pain, he said, a small, wry smile finally touching his lips. It transformed his face, softening the stern lines around his eyes. They go off if you even think about cooking. I let out a shaky laugh, a wave of relief washing over me. Tell me about it. Thank you. I'm really sorry to have bothered you. No bother at all, he said, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long. It's kind of an old habit, he gestured vaguely around the room. You know, hearing an alarm and running towards it. There was something in the way he said it, a hint of melancholy that I hadn't expected. This simple, domestic non-emergency seemed to have stirred something in him. I found myself not wanting him to leave, not yet. Well, I said, my voice bolder than I felt. My hero, the words were meant to be light, a little self-deprecating, but they hung in the air between us with an unexpected weight. Instead of laughing it off, Julian's smile widened just a little. Happy to be of service, he said, and he suggested that, since he was already here, he might as well check the other alarms in my apartment, just to make sure they were all in working order. It was a perfectly logical, neighborly thing to offer, but the way he said it felt like an excuse, a reason to stay. And my heart, which had just started to calm down, gave a hopeful, terrifying leap. I said yes immediately. So he stayed. He used my rickety dining chair as a step stool, testing the alarm in the hallway and the one in my bedroom. I trailed behind him, making awkward small talk, feeling like an interloper in my own home. His presence was so solid, so grounding, it seemed to alter the very atmosphere of each room he entered. He moved with an economy and purpose that I, a person who could spend 20 minutes searching for his own keys, found utterly captivating. You work from home? He asked, noticing my desk set up in the living room. Yeah, I'm a graphic designer, I replied, feeling a sudden need to justify my sedentary life. Lots of logos and websites. Not exactly a high-stakes profession. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. He was fiddling with the cover of the bedroom detector. Nothing wrong with that. Beats running into burning buildings, he said it lightly, but I heard that same undercurrent again, that same hint of something lost. Do you miss it? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. The question felt too personal, but the moment seemed to allow for it. He paused his work, his back still to me. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed softly. Yeah, I do, he said, his voice quieter now. I miss the noise, the team, the feeling that you're useful. Retirement is quiet. Too quiet, sometimes. He turned around then, and the confident, capable facade was gone. In its place was a vulnerability that stunned me. He wasn't just the ruggedly handsome ex-firefighter from across the hall anymore. He was Julian, a man who was navigating a new, quieter life and maybe feeling a little lost in it, just like me. My perception of him shifted, cracking open to reveal the person underneath. He wasn't some unattainable archetype. He was just a man, a lonely one. That revelation was a dangerous thing. It made him seem real. It made him seem possible. It took the vague crush I had and began to sharpen it into something sharper, something more like genuine hope. He finished with the bedroom alarm and moved back into the living room for the final one, the one that had started it all. As he stepped onto the chair, it wobbled slightly on the uneven floor. He shifted his weight to compensate, but for a split second, he was off balance. Without thinking, my body moved on its own. I lunged forward, my hands finding his waist to steady him. My fingers pressed into the firm muscle there, the fabric of his t-shirt soft and warm beneath my palms. It was a purely instinctual, reflexive action, but it was also the first time I had ever touched him. The world seemed to slow down. He froze on the chair, and I froze on the floor below, my hands still gripping his sides. I could feel the solid warmth of him, the sheer physical reality of him, in a way my previous glances and daydreams never could have prepared me for. It was electric. A current passed between us in that brief, accidental touch, a silent acknowledgement of something that had not existed a moment before. He looked down at me, his brown eyes wide with surprise. I quickly pulled my hands away as if I'd been burned, my cheeks flaming. "Sorry," I mumbled, taking a step back. The chair had slipped. "No, thank you," he said, his voice a little rough, a little different than it had been. He cleared his throat and quickly reattached the alarm cover, his movements suddenly less fluid, more deliberate. He stepped down from the chair carefully. The air in the room had changed. It was thick now, charged with an unspoken awareness. The easy, neighborly pretext had dissolved, leaving something raw and uncertain in its place. He turned to face me, the battery from the first alarm still in his hand. "Well," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're all set. No more false alarms." I nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. Was that what this was? A false alarm? A momentary slip that meant nothing? Or was it the real thing, the sounding of a bell I had been waiting my whole life to hear? He handed me the battery, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. Another jolt. Then, with a quick "see you around, Lucas," he was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet of my apartment, my hands still tingling from the memory of his touch. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, agonizing tension. The comfortable anonymity of being neighbors had been shattered. Now, every time I heard his door open across the hall, my breath would catch in my throat. We went from polite nods to a careful, deliberate avoidance of eye contact. A simple trip to the mailbox became a strategic mission. It was as if that small moment of contact had erected a glass wall between us. We could see each other, but the easy air we'd briefly shared had vanished, replaced by a charged silence. A few days after the smoke alarm incident, a storm rolled in. It wasn't just rain. It was one of those dramatic, theatrical thunderstorms that seemed to want to tear the sky apart. The lights in my apartment began to flicker, and with each distant rumble of thunder, a familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I've never liked storms. They make me feel small and exposed. Just as I was drawing all the curtains, as if that could somehow block out the noise, the world went dark. A final, violent crack of thunder echoed directly overhead, and my apartment was plunged into a sudden, complete blackness. The comforting hum of the refrigerator, the glow of my computer screen, everything was gone. There was only the sound of the wind and rain lashing against my window. I was fumbling in a drawer for a flashlight when I heard a knock on my door. It was the same firm, steady knock as before. My heart did a nervous flip. I opened the door to find Julian standing there, his face illuminated by the warm glow of a candle he was holding. In his other hand, he held a large, heavy-duty flashlight. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and reassuring in the darkness. "You okay over here?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, my voice a little shakier than I would have liked. "Just a bit dark." "Power's out for the whole block," he said. "Listen, my place has a better view of the street, so we'll see the utility trucks when they show up. And I've got a battery-powered radio. Why don't you come wait it out with me?" No sense in sitting in the dark alone. The invitation was practical, sensible, but it felt like so much more. It felt like an olive branch, a deliberate attempt to break through the awkwardness that had settled between us. I grabbed my keys and followed him across the hall, the small flame of his candle dancing in the draft. His apartment was a mirror image of mine in layout, but it felt completely different. It was sparse, tidy, and masculine, with darkwood furniture and a few framed prints of forest landscapes on the walls. It smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. He lit a few more candles, casting flickering shadows across the room, and the space felt surprisingly cozy, a tiny island of warmth and light in the stormy darkness. We sat on his sofa, a comfortable distance between us, and listened to the rain. The conversation started slowly, focused on the storm and the power outage. But as the minutes stretched on, the talk deepened. The darkness seemed to grant us a kind of permission to be more honest, more open. I found myself admitting something I rarely told anyone. I've always been kind of terrified of thunderstorms. I confessed, my voice quiet. It's stupid, I know. I expected him to laugh or to offer some kind of logical, dismissive reassurance. But he didn't. He was quiet for a moment, his face thoughtful in the candlelight. It's not stupid, he said finally. You can't control it. It's big, and it's loud, and you don't know where it's going to hit next. Fear is a rational response to that. Then he shared something of his own. I was on a call once, he began, his gaze distant. A warehouse fire. We were inside, and a section of the roof collapsed. No warning, just a sound like thunder, and then everything was fire and falling steel. I was terrified. We all were. Anyone who says they aren't scared in a situation like that is either a liar or a fool. He looked at me then, his eyes finding mine in the dim light. Fear just means you have something to lose, he said softly. The vulnerability was back, raw and real. We weren't just a designer and a firefighter anymore. We were two people sitting in the dark, sharing our fears. Just then, an ear-splitting crack of thunder exploded right outside, shaking the entire building. I couldn't help it. I flinched violently, a choked gasp escaping my lips. In the next second, I felt his arm come around my shoulders, pulling me firmly against his side. It wasn't a hesitant gesture. It was a solid, grounding weight, an immediate and instinctual act of comfort. My head ended up resting against his shoulder, and I could feel the steady, reassuring rhythm of his breathing. The scent of him, that clean, cedar smell, filled my senses. It's okay, he murmured, his voice close to my ear. Just the storm. You're safe. And the incredible thing was, I believed him. Tucked against his side, with his arms securely around me, the storm outside seemed to fade away. The knot of anxiety in my stomach slowly began to unwind. He didn't pull away, and I didn't move. We just sat there in silence for a long, long time, listening to the rain. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was full. It was comfortable. It was everything. After a while, the thunder softened to a distant rumble. He shifted slightly, and I thought he was going to move his arm. I braced myself for the loss of contact, the return to our separate spaces. But he didn't. Instead, he just adjusted his position, settling more comfortably, his arm still firmly around me. He turned his head, and I could feel his breath on my temple. I tilted my head up to look at him. His face was only inches from mine, his features softened by the flickering candlelight. His eyes were dark and serious, and in them, I saw an unmistakable reflection of the chaotic, hopeful, terrified storm that was raging inside of me. His gaze dropped to my lips, and it lingered there for a beat, 2, 3. The world stopped. This was it. This was the moment. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could feel it. I leaned in just a fraction, a silent invitation. But he didn't close the distance. He just held my gaze for another long moment, a silent conversation passing between us that I couldn't fully decipher. Then he took a slow breath, and his eyes lifted back to mine. You're okay, he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I'm here. He squeezed my shoulder gently, a gesture of reassurance that felt both intensely intimate and painfully platonic. It was a turning point, a moment so charged with possibility that it fundamentally altered the landscape between us. But I had no idea which way we had turned. Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered once, twice, and then flooded the room with a harsh, unflinching brightness. The power was back. The storm had passed. The spell was broken. We both blinked in the sudden glare, and he immediately dropped his arm from my shoulders, creating a sudden, chilly void where his warmth had been. The intimacy of the darkness evaporated, leaving us blinking at each other under the sterile light of his overhead lamp. Well, he said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the newly electrified silence. Looks like we're back in business. Yeah, I said, my own voice thin. I stood up, feeling unsteady on my feet. The comfortable sofa suddenly felt like a stage, and the scene was over. I should get back to my place. Thank you. For the light. Anytime, Lucas, he said, walking me to the door. But his easy confidence was gone. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. The air between us was thick with all the things that had almost happened, all the words that had gone unsaid. He opened the door, and I stepped out into the brightly lit hallway that now felt like a chasm between our two worlds. Good night, Julian, I said, turning to face him one last time. Night, he replied, and he gave me a small, tight smile before quietly closing his door. The next few days were worse than the initial awkwardness. Before, it had been a vague, unspoken tension. Now, it was a specific, excruciating memory. My mind was a relentless replay machine, analyzing every single second of that night in his apartment. The weight of his arm, the way he'd looked at my lips, the husky timbre of his voice when he'd whispered, "I'm here." I spun in circles of hope and despair. One moment, I was convinced it was real. The look in his eyes, the possessive way he held me. That wasn't just a neighbor being kind. That was something more. He felt it too. He had to have. The electricity between us was too powerful to be one-sided. Right. But then the fear would creep in, whispering its poisonous doubts. I had imagined it all. I was a lonely guy projecting my own desires onto a compassionate, straight man who was simply comforting a neighbor during a storm. His firefighter instincts had kicked in again. That's all it was. He was protective by nature. The look, the closeness, it was all in my head. I had misread the entire situation, and now he was avoiding me because he was trying to let me down gently, to save me from further embarrassment. I saw him once, getting his mail as I was leaving my apartment. Our eyes met for a split second, and I saw a flash of something in his. Panic? Regret? I couldn't tell. He gave me a tight, barely there nod and practically fled down the stairs. That sealed it for me. I had made him uncomfortable. I had ruined the tentative friendship we were building. The hope that had bloomed in my chest withered, leaving a familiar, hollow ache. I resolved to go back to how things were before, polite, distant, and safe. It was better to admire him from afar than to face the confirmation of his rejection up close. I would keep my head down, bury myself in my work, and try to forget the feeling of his arm around my shoulders in the dark. I spent 2 full days holed up in my apartment, nursing my bruised hopes and trying to force myself to focus on work. I was just about to resign myself to a lonely dinner of leftover pasta when there was a knock at the door. Not the quick rap of a delivery person, but that same firm, deliberate knock I now knew so well. My entire body went rigid. It was Julian. 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind. He was going to complain about noise. He was going to ask to borrow something. He was going to tell me, in the kindest way possible, that I needed to back off. I took a deep breath, pasted a neutral expression on my face, and opened the door. He was standing there, looking just as nervous as I felt. His usual calm was gone, replaced by a restless energy. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. "Hey," he said, his voice low. Can I come in for a minute?" My brain screamed, "No, this is a terrible idea," but I heard myself say, "Of course." I stepped aside and let him in, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He walked into the center of my living room, but didn't sit down. He just stood there, looking around as if he'd never seen the place before. I closed the door, the soft click echoing in the tense silence. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally looked at me, his brown eyes filled with a mixture of anxiety and determination. "No, not really," he said, and his honesty was like a physical blow. "Lucas, I have to talk to you about the other night. During the storm. Here it comes," I thought. The letdown. "You don't have to," I said quickly, trying to save us both the discomfort. "It's fine. I get it. I was just spooked by the storm, and you were being nice. It's forgotten." "No," he said, shaking his head firmly. "That's the problem. I don't want it to be forgotten." And I wasn't just being nice. He took a hesitant step closer, his gaze locked on mine. "I think I might have given you the wrong impression. Or maybe," he paused, swallowing hard, "maybe I gave you the right one, and now I'm scared." I just stared at him, my mind unable to process his words. He was scared. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "The smoke alarm," he began, his voice shaky. It wasn't a coincidence. I mean, yes, your toast burned. but I'd been waiting for a reason to talk to you for months. I saw you moving in. I saw you coming and going. And I couldn't figure out how to start a conversation. So when I heard that alarm, I used it. It was my excuse. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical shock. He'd wanted to talk to me. For months. And the storm. He continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident with every word. I came over because I wanted to see you. I hoped the power would be out. I wanted to be near you. And sitting there with you, in the dark. Lucas, that was the most real I've felt in a long time. He took another step, closing the space between us. Retiring, it turned my whole life upside down. It gave me too much time to think. About what I've done, who I am. About how damn lonely I've been. And then there you were, right across the hall. Kind, and quiet, and creative. And I was terrified. I still am. The dam of my own fear and insecurity broke. All the overthinking, all the doubt, it all just washed away, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. I thought I imagined it. I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. I thought I made it all up in my head. I was so sure I'd scared you off. A look of profound relief washed over his face. You didn't scare me off, he said, his voice impossibly gentle. I scared myself. He slowly reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us for a second before he gently cupped my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, and a shiver ran through my entire body. His touch was warm and real and undeniable. Can I? He asked, his voice barely audible, his eyes searching mine for permission. Is this okay? I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my eyes welling up with tears I hadn't even realized were there. That was all the confirmation he needed. He leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of relief, of months of unspoken feelings pouring out all at once. It was firm and soft, and everything I had secretly hoped for. All the tension, all the awkwardness of the past few days melted away in that single, perfect moment. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I was so worried I'd read everything wrong, he breathed. You read it perfectly, I whispered back, my hands finding their way to his waist, holding him there, finally steadying him for real. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet discovery. Our world, which had been confined to a 30-foot stretch of hallway, suddenly expanded to encompass everything. Our first date was a walk in a park on a crisp autumn afternoon, our hands clasped together, the feeling still new and exhilarating. We cooked dinner in my small kitchen, bumping elbows and laughing, the easy intimacy feeling more natural than anything I had ever known. We learned the small, important things about each other. I learned that Julian, for all his strength and composure, had a surprisingly gentle touch with my houseplants. I learned that he had a dry, understated sense of humor that only came out when he felt truly comfortable. He learned that I hummed when I was concentrating on a design, that I couldn't sleep without the window cracked open, even in the winter. The awkwardness that had defined our early interactions was replaced by a deep, happy, and profoundly peaceful comfort. Being with him felt like coming home to a place I hadn't known I was searching for. A few months later, I was in my kitchen, trying to follow a complicated recipe. I was distracted, talking to Julian as he leaned against the counter, and I smelled it just a second too late, that familiar, acrid scent of something burning. I quickly pulled the pan off the heat, a plume of dark smoke rising towards the ceiling. We both froze, looking first at the smoking pan, and then up at the smoke detector. For a split second, a silent, shared panic flashed between us. Then, we both burst out laughing. It was a helpless, giddy kind of laughter that made my sides ache. Julian came up behind me as I fanned the smoke away with a magazine. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest and resting his chin on my shoulder. His body was a warm, solid presence at my back, a comforting and familiar weight. You know, he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. I'm starting to think you do this on purpose. I leaned my head back against his shoulder, my laughter subsiding into a contented sigh. Maybe, I said. Got to keep my hero on his toes. He tightened his arms around me, his lips brushing against my temple. Good thing I'm here to keep an eye on you, he whispered. And it wasn't just a joke anymore. It wasn't a callback to an awkward beginning. It was a promise. It was the simple, profound truth of our new reality. It's funny, isn't it? How your life can be so quiet for so long that you forget it can be anything else. You get used to the silence. But I learned that sometimes the loudest, most jarring alarms aren't a warning of danger. Sometimes they're a signal that you need to wake up. They're a sign that you need to open your door, because the person on the other side might just be the one who can lead you out of the smoke and into the rest of your life. All you have to do is be brave enough to breathe.